Disruptive innovations.
An opportunity to engage
With the defining technologies
that are shaping our age.
Good morning and welcome. Thank you for being here. That was quite the welcome video. Thanks for putting that together. My name is Dean Garfield. I am the CEO of the Information Technology Council, which is a collection of the world's most dynamic and innovative companies, from Apple and Amazon to Swift to Zebra. And I'm honored to be here. We have an A-plus panel to lead this conversation, in that everyone's name begins with A, so it makes it a little bit easy for me. We have Axel Lehman, Alex right next to Axel, and then Amber. In fact, we'll take some questions from the audience, but if your name doesn't begin with an A, then we may not listen to you. So, as I mentioned, Axel is the Group COO of UBS Group AG. He's also the president of the executive board for UBS Business Solutions. Axel has served in various capacities, including at the CEO level, at a number of financial institutions. He also happens to be a doctor, in that he has both his master's and PhD in business administration. So, Dr. Lehman, thank you for being here. Alex is the global head of transaction banking at Standard Chartered. He's also worked in the financial services industry for quite a number of years, having worked at Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank and a number of others. Alex is the perfect bridge to this conversation because he has his MBA, but he also has an engineering degree. And so will be able to help us through the conversation, both from the financial services perspective and technology. We're also pleased to have Amber Case, who is a scholar and an entrepreneur. She is formerly founded and was the CEO of Geoloki, a company that was acquired. Congratulations. She is now a fellow at the Berkman Center at Harvard University, and a research fellow, a visiting researcher at MIT. Thank you all. We will have poll questions that we would like you to answer, as well as questions that you can send. In fact, I think there is a laptop here that I can use to ask some of the questions as you send them up. And so you can follow the instructions that are on the screen, so that you can send your questions in to us. So let's jump right into it. And I'll ask a broad and provocative, but I hope not an idiotic question, which is, do banks still matter? Are banks still important in today's society? And I assume your answer is going to be yes, so if you can say a little bit of why you think that's the case. We'll start with Axel or Alex, whichever of you prefers going first.
I can give a shot. Yeah, I think it was Bill Gates who said 30 years ago, banking is essential, banks are not. And since then we are struggling with that. I think banks play a really important role in society increasingly, also in the economy, but we need to provide our value proposition and our services in the appropriate way. And when I look to also the topic of that conference, innovation, whole digital transformation, fourth industrial revolution, I truly believe, just the banking model as we have it as of today is probably outdated. When we are here in 10 years, we will probably say, look, that was the old world, and now there's somewhat a new world coming. But I think they're all opportunities. They're all opportunities. Why do I say so? First of all, those banks that have a clear strategy, that have access to customer, they have know-how, and they can have somewhat intellectual, intangibles that they can provide to the customer. That's a big, big asset to have. Secondly, a big, big asset to have is, is also a kind of a machine that you have as a bank. I always like to give the example of last year. We had Brexit, and we had, for example, the presidential election in the US, where suddenly you have, trading volume spiking by 2 to 10 times. So you have basically an infrastructure that you can scale up in milliseconds, and you can multiply millions and millions of transactions and trades. So that is definitely an asset to have, which is subject to complete change. So I think, yes, there's an opportunity. I think it's all about knowing the customer. It's about deep insights. It's having better use of the data that is available. But we need to be mindful. There are a lot of people that are looking, partly here in the room. They want to, call it the tech part of the business model, and that is great. That is somewhat the innovation that is taking place on an unprecedented scale. Yes, I think banking have a clear role to play in today's society and economy. I think they will play an important role on a going forward basis, but yes, I believe there's change.
Great. Alex, your take?
So do banks matter? Obviously it has to be my story. As for a number of people in the room, I know. When you think of bank, other than thinking of and perhaps disliking your current banking experience, when you think of bank, you think of utilitarian concepts. You think of storage of wealth, and obviously we need this, and you think of infrastructure, right? Making payments, receiving payments, making this happen in a safe way, please. Don't fail it. Get me my cash at my ATM. This is take it for granted. This is what banks do, and we all understand we need someone to do this. I actually think that banks matter increasingly for something else, which is connecting. We connect business communities. When we connect investors and depositors, we connect something. When we connect suppliers and distributors around a supply chain, it's an act of connecting. And perhaps this is an old image we were discussing earlier of an old village with a church in the middle and a school and a bank branch. And all those institutions have been connecting a community. Well, it's now a virtual community. It's all digitized. The branch may no longer exist because we've replaced it with a great channel. But the value in connecting business communities is ultimately what we need banks to do to drive commerce and prosperity, and that's really what society is expecting. So you both alluded to the global integration that's been happening in the world, and technology was driving us there. Amber, do you think that drive for greater global integration is dead or stalled, or is technology still pushing us on that inevitable path?
Yeah, I think that society runs on abstractions of value, and we have to store them somewhere, and then we have to access them, we have to maintain that. And whatever shape that ends up being, whether that's cryptocurrency or microloans or whatever, the shape of it might change a little bit, but fundamentally it's the same thing. And I think the greatest innovations are going to be in user experience and reducing the complexity behind the scenes. Because right now I think there are all these complicated structures, a lot of them have wasted code, wasted interfaces, people who aren't actually doing anything, wasted brick and mortar in some cases where a bank could be virtual, and no branches where people actually need them. And I think that the problem with that is that there's going to just be so many attacks and hacking, and it'll be very brittle. I think we're coming out of a period of industrial revolution in which everything was really big, and as long as you had scale and might, everything worked. And we're going from there to a more organic, light period of time where things that are smoother, things that react with their ecosystem and understand their ecosystem are more likely to survive. So it's more of like an ecological view that we need to take. When a person gets a cold, they don't die. But when a bank gets hacked, there's all sorts of horrible things that can happen. And we have to look at it more like building antibodies and making it more of a biological structure and having it be very easy to actually work with. And I think the banks that are really brittle and refuse to improve their user experience for everybody, investors, money managers, the internal customer experience, the internal employee experience, they're just going to lose out over time.
If we're moving to an ecosystem that is more organic, where the customer is central and friction is limited, why do you need global institutions or global banks?
Because these ecosystems are inherently global. So think of a bank client, and maybe the conventional, traditional way banks have thought of clients is this is an entity. Here's a company. Here's a corporate client. The reality is that the corporate client has suppliers of suppliers, and then distributors and smaller distributors, all the way to an end consumer. That's actually really the ecosystem of that particular client. And for that client to do well, that ecosystem's got to do well, meaning be sustainable. For that client to grow, which is often an objective, that ecosystem has to grow sustainably. And that ecosystem happens to be completely global. They're, in conventional ways, supply chains moving from Pearl River Delta in China to Vietnam, from Vietnam to Bangladesh, from Bangladesh to East Africa, and so forth. And you expect banks to serve that ecosystem and support it across borders seamlessly, which is part of what correspondent banking is about, as we think of ourselves as an industry. But this is also why you need international banks to continue to fulfill that function.
Axel, you made the point about seeing opportunity and the opportunity to integrate technology to create more seamless experiences. Can you talk a little bit about whether it's UBS or otherwise, how you see banks integrating or you're integrating technology into your processes?
The way we look at it from a global perspective, now we are a preeminent wealth manager, but we have also a strong universal bank Switzerland focused investment and asset manager. So we have a lot of customer touch points across the globe. But we look to technology somewhat, the one is what you said is the customer experience. I think that's probably the game in town, that you need to really think from the customer to what you want to deliver. So it's the customer experience. Secondly, we'd also look to kind of product, behavioral economics, other things. So what is the product and service offering that will change, and where we can leverage technology, and ultimately also the efficiency game. And maybe contrary to what most of the people believe, I believe for us as call it the traditional players in the marketplace, it will be really on the efficiency that we have. I think the industry as a whole has an efficiency and a cost efficiency challenge, and the more work we do there, the better we will be off. So how to use robotics, other techniques to really get us more efficient, but it needs to start really at the client experience. Secondly, you asked me for a quite specific example. Traditionally banking has been a very people-oriented business. So when I look, for example, in our Swiss business, the whole client onboarding experience and everything with it, that was basically the blueprint in mind was the customer is coming to the branch office, and from there everything starts. And I think in the new world, that's not anymore the case. In the new world, it's really, it's a digital experience that you have, and maybe we have a branch, and maybe the customer is going to the branch, but it must be the same as he or she would not go to the branch. That's a fundamental re-engineering that is taking place. That is much more than just to put a nice little app somewhere that you can download, and then you can do your onboarding. I think that's a fundamental re-engineering that is taking place, which hints, for example, okay, there will be always, and it's a customer choice if he goes on a branch or not, or if he just uses technology. Let me give you another example in wealth management, where traditionally, we have, the ultra and the high net worth individuals. So the traditional business model is I come to the the customer service advisor, and increasingly, we have robo-advisors and others. So we put also a robo-advisor out. We run that in the UK market, but ultimately we want to keep the choice for the customer. So he can go fully electronic, he can go fully by a human, he can go somewhere in between. So, I think in the 70s, people were speaking about high tech and high touch. I think that will be the secret sauce in a lot of customer segments. Not in all of customer segments, but in our case, in wealth management, that will be the secret sauce.
Alex?
I wanted to echo some of what Axel's just said, because I think it's very relevant. We've managed to say the word client experience 3 or 4 times already on this panel, so it's obviously relevant. At least we think it is. And then you brought up efficiency, which is also relevant. The cost of delivery is too high. So we need to change the client experience, and we need to make it more efficient, cheaper in the same time. And that seems like a contradiction. I want it everywhere, anywhere, anytime, right now, as seamlessly as I buy stuff on Amazon or music on Apple. And it has to be cheaper, more efficient. Oh, by the way, I also want it scalable. I also want it to not fail, and completely compliant, from financial crime to everything else. And so it's a segue into the fact that we are going to need serious technology to do this. It doesn't work the way we do things today.
Yeah, you were talking about serious technology. We often assume that all technology is the same and that everyone understands the difference between machine learning and AI or neural learning. Can you disaggregate for us a little bit and say where you see opportunity for financial services and otherwise?
Sure. I think let's kind of define AI as it is right now. Let's look all the way over here. We have what we've been given in fiction, which is a perfect AI in which everything is automated. And there's this intelligence that is better and larger than us, somehow still programmed by humans. I don't get how you get that after being programmed by humans, but you get this kind of fictional thing out here. And then you have the Industrial Revolution, which was all about automating things, and automating things at scale. So kind of through, first we worked with farm animals, and we worked with all sorts of different systems, and then we got industrial automation. And now we have a little bit into the robot stage, where the robots are either robotic arms that are physical, building Tesla cars. We have robots that are indexing search results for Google, and they're invisible, pretty much. And we're dealing with robots and bots, disembodied pieces of code, probably 1,000 or 2,000 times a day. It's giving us all the information that we get on our phone. It's talking to cell towers for us. I mean, those are little automaton systems. Then we have a kind of narrow AI, and the narrow AI is, when you're on a banking system online, it says, "Hi, how can I help you?" And it has a little bit of a knowledge base in there, and then it quickly doesn't work anymore. Or when you're on a phone tree and there's a disembodied voice that sounds awful, but yet you get through the phone tree, and eventually, after pressing 0 as many times as you can, you get to the real
I've
person,
been there.
right? So the more automation that happens, the more important customer service becomes, and the more important that interface is between you and the kind of robot. So that kind of narrow AI, we see that in the promises of Alexa and Google Home. The problem with a lot of those is because they speak in a kind of human voice at us in full sentences, we expect that we can speak back at them with the same understanding that it sounds like they're speaking at us. And so that's kind of like a mismatch. Other than that, you get a Roomba robotic vacuum cleaner that just goes dun-dun-dun-dun when it's done and dun-dun when it's not done. You don't need to translate that into a bunch of different languages. It's cute, it's effective, not really. It doesn't clean corners, but it's pretty good. And we know that isn't very good at this job in a way, so we can pick it up and move it when it gets stuck. Like, that's a really good it's not AI, it's just a little robot. We have robots in our homes. When electricity came out, all of the apps came out. The app was the washing machine and the dryer and the electric stove. I mean, these were big deals, right? And now they're part of our society. So we have that kind of narrow AI, and then we have what Gary Kasparov, the chess champion, who got defeated by Deep Blue, which was really just a lot of people behind the scenes trying to beat him. He came up with this idea, think of centaurs, where a person with a mediocre skill at, say, chess, and a good computer system that augments can beat a very skilled chess player. And this is a thing where it's not like the computer's doing something for you, it's augmenting you. It's giving you suggestions. And I think this sector of AI, or whatever you call it, is a really interesting thing where if somebody's coming in as a customer, you're augmenting them, giving them choices, giving them options when they need them, giving them the information that might be interesting to them, but not doing it for them, not doing it on their behalf. Then you have machine learning and deep learning, which are very interesting systems, which can be used to detect cancer before it happens, detect fraud. And if you look in the fraud industry, there's a lot of it that's done automated, and it's really, really fine-tuned, but there's still a lot when they can't figure it out. 20% of it still goes to a person, and there are these people that say, okay, I can hear the call center behind the scenes, I think this is a fraudulent call, and people are still the weakest link in that system. And then, of course, you have the fictional AI. But I think the promise of technology that was originally stated was that it would augment us, it would free our time, not expand to fill every single spot that we have on our schedule. And we haven't reached that promise. We have some things that are slightly more convenient for us, but when we talk about automation and AI, I go to a hotel and I check in with an automated robot. It's just forcing the labor to me. The automatic checkout system in a grocery store, I have to type in the numbers for the fruit and the vegetables, and instead of having somebody that knows those. So suddenly it's taking me more time. And then when I'm bored, I look at some feed. So I don't think we've gotten exactly to the promise of technology, but I think if we work on systems that bubble up the information we need when we need it and give us those options in a nice way, like the Google suggest in Gmail is kind of neat, but doesn't make the decision for us, then we're amplifying the best of what a machine does, which is going through a lot of data and giving suggestions, like Google search results, and we're augmenting what humans are good at, which is curation and weird, innovative things, and freeing up what the Greeks called kairos time. There's these kind of two kinds of time, chronos and kairos. Chronos being this very industrial time. You have a meeting at this time. That's not where innovation happens. Innovation happens, as Archimedes found in the bathtub when he jumped out of the bathtub. Oh, wow, I figured out the density of items. It was this eureka moment. That happened in this kind of kairos time. And when we talk about automating things, I always ask, do you want to automate having a kid, getting married, falling in love? No. Right? Well, what do you want to automate? You want to automate the things you don't want to do so that you can get to the time to do those weird things you didn't expect and then make the innovations there. And I think that's one of the issues when we say AI can replace everything. We have co-evolved with technology since the beginning of time. We will continue to do so. Some of these really boring jobs will be automated, but hopefully we'll get into a place where we can do more interesting stuff because we do have more time.
As banks, how do you make sense of that and decide where to integrate and where it can make things easier versus just a showpiece that's not really relevant? By the way, as we've been talking, the polling has remained almost perfectly consistent, which is a slight majority of people think banks are absolutely essential, with a plurality thinking somewhat. And so thanks for your feedback on that. We'll go to the second question. How do you make sense of the opportunities and the various technologies that Amber was talking about and integrate them into your business in a way that leads to everywhere access, but also doing it cheaper?
Right. I think an obvious takeaway of what Amber just said is it's very early days, isn't it? We're at the very early stages of understanding how we'll apply technology. I think the other thing that I think is directly applicable, relevant in the context of banking is this sort of dichotomy between, on the one hand, digitizing the experience. It's on a platform. It's anywhere, anytime. It's no longer in a branch. It's different, right? We've taken the human away, and your point about actually we need to make it human again, right? It needs to be a human experience, and we are increasingly talking about a human bank in a digital age, and making that client experience a lot more pleasant. And it's essentially the challenge that we need to resolve. The reason why I say it's early days is because I think we are at the early stages of understanding how it is that we incorporate the technology that is available increasingly today, and make it make sense in the context of a banking experience or an efficient process. In fact, both. And making those tools part of the toolkit in a broader banking context. Yeah.
Axel, I was just watching an interview with Sergio Ramotti, who's obviously the CEO of UBS, and he was talking about regulation and transnational regulation and the burden that it places on banks, and the potential for technology to help drive down those costs and make that more efficient. I assume you'll agree with him, but you can expand on that a little bit, or you can make news and disagree with him. It's your choice.
It's the boss. It's the boss. Yeah.
No. Let me put it into perspective. I truly believe when you see today. By the way, I think really, artificial intelligence. You gave a great description. It's the buzzword of the year. That is fantastic, and probably in 2-3 years we will have some other buzzwords. But I truly believe artificial intelligence, doesn't matter how you describe it, that will fundamentally change the way we operate and the way we work. We just don't see it yet. When you look to all the use cases that get tested, all the announcement, every day you read something else that is happening, it's hard to see that you see that already either in revenue growth or cost-income ratios somewhere else. I truly believe in 4 to 8 years that will happen. And what will happen is basically twofold. On one hand, it's, and Amber, you spoke about, we will automate those more mundane activities. That's what we try, so RPA and so on and so forth. I call that more a tactical move, and that will significantly impact the workforce. It will impact in particular the workforce that most of the banks have, for example, through an onshore-offshore process moved into so-called lower-cost locations. This has been more mundane activities, and they are all subject to automation. But artificial intelligence, machine learning has a completely different connotation. And for us, it's not the problem. The challenge for us is not technology. We as large banks, most of them here in the room, we can buy all of the technology that we need to have. We can develop it on our own. We have thousands of software engineers. That is not the problem. The problem is really, how to develop the use case, how to generate value out of it, respectively, how to change and adopt the business model. And I think that's the true revolution that we will see, that technology will not only, quote unquote, impact and partially eliminate more mundane activities that we don't really like to do. They are not too exciting. It goes right into the core. It will go right into the core, in the bank, on portfolio composition, on portfolio monitoring. It's not only anymore in trading on price discovery. Maybe it's predictive pricing that you can do using data and new technologies. A trader today will not be the same trader in 10 years from here, because why do you need somebody that is doing most of what the trader is doing today? You can do that through technology. That is, I think, the exciting, the fascinating part. So what we see today is basically technology, and this digital revolution is allowing us to look to the overarching value chain from all angles. And I said we need to start from a customer perspective, but that will change fundamentally. And that is completely different than compared to transformation that the industry went through. And we can pride ourselves, but when you look back 50 years ago, UBS was the first bank, I think, in Europe to implement an ATM. And at that time, you look to the newspaper, there were two camps in the newspaper. One was saying that is fantastic, but all branches will disappear and all the bank tellers will need to look for a new job. And then there were the others that said that will never happen. Now people will never go to a machine when they want to have some cash. They always want to go. So that was this guessing. Or then, 20 years later, there was somewhat electronic trading. That was a revolution on the trading floors. So there were always something. Now it's everything is subject to that technological, this digital revolution. Even the top jobs in a company, our lawyers, our accountants, the finance guys, the traders, the brainy economists that we have, they all need to think about how technology or forms of artificial intelligence can either enhance what they are doing and partially will replace it. And I think that's the real part.
How are you restructuring how you're organized to take advantage of this? So if this goes to the core, it is fundamentally not an issue that only a CIO can handle. How are you structuring yourself so you're thinking about this thoroughly, thoughtfully, and systematically?
So
go ahead, Alex. Either of you.
Maybe I'll repeat one thing you said a little differently, which is, I think I heard you say, in the end of the day, the last thing we want is a bunch of solutions looking for a problem.
Right.
Right. For innovation to be relevant, it has to be relevant. It has to be both new and relevant. And the definition of relevant is that a customer cares. If no customer cares, then it was perhaps new but useless. So that innovation process is not going to happen in a vacuum. And that goes to your question around how you organize it. It has to happen with clients. And at times we
with clients.
With clients, it has to, at times we do this in co-creation with clients, which is easier to do in the wholesale banking space perhaps than in the retail banking space. But this element of it has to be owned by a business that wants to do things differently, and using and incorporating technology as part of that innovation process. But it is a client-driven activity as opposed to innovation for its own sake.
Go ahead, sorry. Amber, just looking at best practices or your study, what do you think? What are you seeing?
I see worse practices everywhere. I mean, it's not, I like to go back in time and look in the 60s and the 80s and the 90s at the different AI blossoming and winters, right? Where people were like, AI is going to solve the world. And you were talking about this quote from your dad where he said, he was having to answer these same questions. Is AI going to take over the world? These are always the same questions every single generation. There's just more and more people online each time. And when I was writing my thesis, I found some research from Xerox PARC, which was on this concept of calm technology instead of super interruptive technology. And Mark Weiser and John Seeley Brown were some of the research scientists on this, and they found that the more tech we had in the future, the scarcest resource in the 21st century wouldn't be technology, it would be our attention. And how technology deals with our attention is really crucial, and it would be use the least amount of technology to get the job done, which is really hard to do because it's really...
Does that suggest that we're overreacting?
Yes, yes, oftentimes it's, and I've been part of large companies where they say, okay, we need to buy this thing, or a really great salesperson comes in from some very large database company, which I won't name, and they'll say, well, let's solve this problem. Let's solve this problem for you, which means you'll hire this solution, which is really a team of 17 people and a giant contract for 7 years.
Hey, don't talk bad about my members, please.
I want none of you in here. None of these companies. Some other company. And this is a problem because it's not that everybody has the best intent, but we're dealing with things that are fundamentally invisible. When we dealt with, let's say, World War II, it was if you built a plane and it was too complex, it wouldn't fly. It literally wouldn't fly. So you could test it by trying to take it off the ground. And I had a friend who gave a presentation of just all these overbuilt planes. But oftentimes you get these systems that are so convoluted and messy, written in weird or popular computer programming languages that don't exist in another 2 years because they were really hot at one time and then the developers have lost attention. Or there's all these kind of pitfalls where people panic and they say, I read about AI in a magazine, we have to implement this now, right? Which is
So would it be an overreaction? One of the questions from the audience is, should banks have a chief AI officer?
Oh no. I think in every new buzzword, and AI is a suitcase term, it's really easy to carry around, but there's a lot of baggage in it, a lot of complexity, and we can just throw it around, and we end up getting a lot of these words. And every time there is a word like that, it's like, should there be a chief social media officer? I mean, remember that debate? Should there be a chief mobile officer? Do we have any of these? I mean, there's the chief of whatever. I think chief design officer, for instance, like have design be at the top, because designers often, there's this quote that design is achieved when there's nothing left to take away. If you have somebody from that perspective at the top of the company, along with the CEO, they can apply design methodology to kind of defragment this chaos and these invisible components that don't really work with each other. And I think the other issue is that we often find that, we'll go on retreats, right? And we'll figure out, oh, we really need to solve this problem. And then we go back and there's an emergency and there's all these emails and we never get to it. And it's often those really core things that are hard to just stop the company and kind of fix. And it's hard to find the right people to work on those things because everybody wants to complicate stuff.
Yeah, but there is, and Axel, I know you have something to say, but this doesn't happen in a vacuum. Part of it is competitive pressures, and so you see your competitors investing. How do you ensure? You started by making the point about getting left behind and
sure. When I said, look, it's really not about the technology. I think what I said earlier, we can really buy and integrate, and it's really not to have another chief something. We have chief customer officers and chief whatsoever. boy, when you are in banking, financial or in retail or wherever you are, you have customer and you need to deal with it. Why do you need a chief something, a chief customer office? So why should you need a chief artificial intelligence officer? I think the real transformation is when we want to use and leverage technology and be more successful, more effective, more efficient, better customer experience. It's really about innovation and change, and business manager, line manager, they need to drive the change ultimately. It's not I'm a banker and I have here a tech guy and I buy some software and that helps me. It's really how to use technology to drive that overall change when I am really in charge. So you ask me, how to do that. You need to have a culture of innovation in an organization. You need to accept as a large organization that we cannot at the headquarters do innovation and buy some stuff and then just impose it to the units. We want to have it, normally innovation is happening at the interface to the customer. So that's what you need to have, and you need to find a way that you can motivate your people to leverage technology, and it's not that easy, But I said, to roll out, for example, robots, that is, for certain parts of the organization going very well. For other, there's a little bit more resistance. We have machine learning out, very good, I think, not only use cases really in production, great benefits that we have, but to roll out machine learning as a platform in the organization, that's a change management. That is not a tech issue. And then we have obviously some pilots out, use cases, facial recognition, language recognition, other parts that we use new forms of technology. As long as this is a kind of a pilot that is nice, you can get a headline in the newspaper. But to roll that out in a productive way and change the business model and create value with it, that is something that line management needs to embrace, and I think that's the transformation we need to go through.
Yeah, Alex, go ahead. But one thing, so the audience was overwhelmingly of the view that AI is different. Yeah. So absolutely right about technology helping, and that more important is driving the broader cultural change. Is there something different about AI, though, that is even more disruptive and more important to banks?
I'll try and answer this, and wanted to get back to a point about innovation Axel just made. I guess we're focusing on data a little more here, and the working assumption is that data is incredibly relevant. In fact, it's critical to changing that client experience, improving it, and it's also critical in terms of making ourselves more efficient. The human brain, correct me if I'm wrong, but the human brain does a pretty good job actually with data, right? Processing data on a small human scale. So the point of data is useless unless it gives me insights, and those insights give me intelligence, and intelligence gets to action. So I want data to be actionable. The human brain does that on a small scale. The problem is with talking about a huge scale. We have lots of data. When we start pooling it together as an industry, then we have huge amounts of data. And this is where AI really comes in. So that's why it is probably different and a little more than a buzzword today. A management point, I guess, do we overreact a little bit? Perhaps. I think it's okay up to a point. When you're a business person, if you're not a little paranoid, you're at a very big risk of being complacent. Yeah. And the better things go for all of us in organizations which have done remarkably well for some period of time and then not so well at all, and then coming out of it, the point is you have to have that willingness to question what you're doing, reinvent yourself, and jettison ways of doing things, and come out with other ones. Which gets me to the last point, which is the last place to do this is probably the headquarters, as you said. The last place to do it is at headquarters. In fact, we ask our employees every now and then a number of things, but one of the interesting facts is the further away they are from headquarters, the happier they are. They really don't want it. They really don't want it. In Pakistan, Bangladesh,
should we make
great.
That a poll question?
That's beautiful. In Singapore, London, not so. And so there's and oftentimes we say well, the world thinks they have Silicon Valley and technological innovation, but we have India, China, Pakistan, and Africa. And so there is a real job of capturing that effervescence of both needs and ideas and entrepreneurial spirit at times, and making sense of it, capturing it. And yes, at some point, headquarters needs to get involved to channel it and translate this into a product roadmap and all the things we know. But there's an element of crowdsourcing, to use another buzzword, that innovation, which is in our markets and with our clients and with our people. Right?
You've all alluded to the societal impact, and I want to go there in a minute, but just picking up on the buzzwords and headquarters driving it, another buzzword that is quite popular right now in addition to AI is blockchain. Amber's wincing. I'm curious, you could jump in on that.
Sure.
I'm curious about your sense of whether it's real. Is it something that you're beginning to integrate and experiment around, and the implications for financial services or society more broadly? You're the engineer who's a banker, so go ahead, Alex. You can start, and then Axel can weigh in.
I failed at engineering, and so I became a banker.
There's hope for everyone then.
I think it's incredibly relevant. I think of blockchain as and it's a defined term, a foundational technology, meaning it's not a tool, it's not a technology, it's a foundational technology. So it has the potential and the high probability of transforming quite a few things we do. The way I'd conceptualize it from a banking perspective, from a banking experience perspective, is we want things real time, we want things anywhere, we want things certain, and that is essentially what DLT, which is perhaps the better word, does for us. It is real time.
As in distributed ledgers.
It is real time. It is transparent. We like transparency, don't we? But there's other ways to get to transparency. We can provide a lot of transparency with the technology we have today already. But it also provides that single source of truth and that certainty, right? A payment is then irrevocable when it's happened. And from the standpoint of a customer experience which is migrating towards the expectations of our kids, our millennials and next generations, whatever they're called, because I think beyond that, I'm not sure. If it's not on a platform, it doesn't exist. If it's not anywhere, anytime, everywhere, it's sort of irrelevant. I don't want to deal with it. The concepts of mobility and in the same time harnessing the power of data. It's very easy to see how a single source of truth that is entirely transparent is going to be highly relevant in the context of enabling all that.
No, sure. On the one hand, the blockchain is probably real when you just look the amount of money that goes in, and even at that conference, everybody want to have, has either something to say or something to offer in this regard. Fact is that so far what you see is applications are more private blockchains. I'm not aware there's any public blockchain, but I look at it as a kind of a technology, distributed ledger technology that has huge potential. Probably in a conference like this one 3-4 years ago, that was touted to be the next internet for the financial sector, and everything will rush and be very, very quick. It will take a little bit of time until we'll see applications out there. A lot of questions, practical questions to be addressed, from performance, security, and other questions that I think we are all aware. But I think it's really interesting. It's really interesting. Great opportunities. I'm not even sure if the financial sector is the best form of application for a blockchain, or if in other industries have better, easier to implement use cases, because our industry is heavily complex in this regard. But in the longer and mid and longer term, I think we will see probably some good, where people would say that it's worth to invest. It's worth to invest in this. For us, it means obviously we have also some use cases out. It's still a little bit a learning by doing, as it is with most financial institutions and tech providers, by the way.
So you've all alluded to the societal impact of these technologies and disruption in the video at the beginning, alluded to it as well. And Amber, you've written some books looking at the society and how we interface with technology. What's your sense of what the implications are for workers, society, of some of these disruptive technologies, including AI? Yeah, I think usually it's not that humans aren't ready for technology. Humans are usually not ready for the technology. The technology has often been there for a long time, and so it's really about how we learn to work it into our lives. And the issue with new technology especially is that we get really excited about it because we haven't seen it before. The new is great because it has the same amount of issues as the old stuff. We just know the issues in the old stuff, so it's not as exciting anymore.
And I would say, yes, it's really important to do basic research. We need more think tank style, just go in and figure things out and come back with what it is without the expectation to put it into a product. And we need to figure out what the limits are and be clear about those limits. And then say, well, we can either put money into research to get rid of these limits or figure out a different structure. I think one of the biggest issues is going to be hacking and personal profiles and information. And I think decentralized distributed technology is an interesting workaround for that, where let's say you have your personal database on your phone or on your computer, and you submit that information to, let's say, a centralized or sharded database somewhere, and that's they're interacting with the system for 30 minutes during the time that you're doing the transaction, and then the information is updated to your device again. And so if somebody hacks into that system, they're only getting access to the accounts that are currently sharing during that 30-minute window. So the data is stored with you. And I think the issue is that we can't expect every single financial institution or software company or anybody to continuously prevent attacks on personal data. And so a different model could be used, which is why I'm really interested in anything that's, if it's distributed, decentralized, if it's stored in a different way, that's exciting. But we shouldn't put all of these things on a pedestal. We should actually investigate them, because again, it's more suitcase terms that are easy to say. I do like saying distributed ledger instead of blockchain. Or hyperledger. I like the hyperledger project, because that's what it is. It's a distributed ledger. We're glorifying a ledger here, and it's okay to say that. It's okay to instead of saying everything will run on the blockchain. I mean, for instance, not everything runs on credit cards. Not everything runs on. We still have checkbooks. We still have cash, and I think people are going to need options, and some things work better for other things, like food carts. They work pretty well with cash a lot of the times, and sometimes they work better. But until Square came in and had a little tile that you put into the phone jack on your phone, it wasn't feasible for food carts to take that. And so the innovation was not necessarily there's credit card technology, it was how to get credit cards to work with something that people already had. There's all these kind of secondary and tertiary disruption models that are just out there for the taking, that we get so enamored by like a new thing that we forget there's all these little things that we can pick out and really innovate.
And that's
that mundane stuff is exciting,
excitement
right?
of innovation is it's often incremental, and so in building on.
Yeah.
Look, I think to answer the societal question, I think it will fundamentally impact how the future of work. For people. Part of it, we need this new technology. Just when you look to most of the more matured economies, we will have a net loss of labor. Just when I look to little tiny Switzerland with 8 million inhabitants, over the next 10 years, we will have a net loss due to aging, despite all the migration ongoing of 500,000 jobs. So
do you think there will be a net loss in workers or work?
In workers. So we need new technologies to fill that in. All things are equal. Secondly, I think it's sure when you take today's environment, you look to our today's portfolio, and you fast forward the opportunities of technology. We said as a UBS Law over the next 10 years, we can do the same amount of work with 30%, maybe it's 40%, maybe it's 25%, but a big amount of number of less people that do the job. But there will be new opportunities obviously coming. That is definitely clear. And just when you think about, when we 100 years ago, when we would have had that conference, we would be all farmers and we would talk about, how to grow potatoes and carrots. Today it's 1% of the population that are farmers, and everybody has found a new and another job. So we will.
How do we advance that transition though without having another depression? Because that story gets told, but the depression era part of it is often ignored. So how do we begin, and we'll save a few minutes to have questions from the audience, by the way. There are some mics out there, and there's a poll question on this, on whose responsibility it is to drive that training today. Do you see it as a company responsibility, government responsibility, a bit of both?
And individual. So the answer, I think, is lifelong learning. In a conventional sense, we spend for the privileged amongst us, as most people, 20 years learning something and then trying to apply it for the rest of our lives. This is over. This is over, and the next generations will be thinking, 5-year careers, and will need to reinvent themselves.
Do you think that's now the norm? Because I mean,
I don't know
for
if
folks like us who got multiple advanced degrees and live in a certain world, we get the norm of lifelong learning. I wonder about society generally, if
let's put it this way,
see
for bankers in the room, I think it would be disingenuous about talking about the need for banks to reinvent themselves and then assume that I don't need to reinvent myself. Right. It's the bank that I want to reinvent. So I think it would be a little inconsistent.
Right.
And so there is a need for a reinvention. I wanted to make a quick point on you were focusing on the societal impacts and focusing on technology versus society. I think there's also another conversation in this room, which is banking in society. And a quick history, which most people know, is breach of trust, financial crisis, terrible client experience. We don't like bankers. It's fair game from a political perspective. Let's go and tame these guys. And we default back to the utilitarian notions about banks, which in the end of the day, it's about the infrastructure and storage of wealth. The way banks escape the utility trap, not the middle income trap, but the utility trap here, is with reinvention. And in that respect, thank heavens for that disruption. Disruption is good. There's nothing to be defensive about, or insecure. Although it may be a little human to react this way. The reality is there is a need for reinvention, which we need as a banking industry.
Will that mean fewer banks?
Or different ones, perhaps fewer of a kind and more of a different kind. I would expect the dynamics of the industry to evolve. That's a truth.
Yeah, Amber, and then we'll take a few questions. If you want to put your hand up, we'll get a mic to you.
Sure. I grew up with a mom whose job was automated, which was very weird to experience because at the time she was the highest paid person at the local television station. She did master control operation, which basically you take all these different reels of film and edit in commercials and then throw it on television 6 channels at a time. It's super complicated. She had to take all these tests to do it. And then a couple years later, that got automated. And so I think there'll be the automation of a lot of these things, and people will have to kind of migrate around and learn new things and constantly be thinking, okay, if I'm, let's say an Uber or a Lyft driver right now, what's the chance of this being automated? What can I evolve into after that? And constantly be thinking like 3-4 years in advance and thinking of these kind of global trends. The switch, what do you switch into after that? I think there'll be a lot of these jobs that got automated, but her job after it got automated was to watch the machine do the work that she used to do. And I think that's one of the things is now people will babysit the machine or they will maintain the machine. So you'll get this like new set of blue collar jobs that are watching and maintaining machines that used to do the thing that you did. It might not actually be cost effective to monitor the equivalent of a giant Roomba that's like cleaning the floor in an institution. It might be better just to hire a person to do that. And we haven't seen that yet. So we have to kind of think of, if there are kids growing up in the future, they'll go through like 20 or 30 different jobs. A lot of them might be contracting gigs. They might not pay all the bills. They might be taking 3 or 4 jobs at a time and barely making ends meet. And that's really unfortunate psychologically because there won't be any extra time. You'll have to dedicate some of that time constantly to worrying about whether you'll be able to survive or not. And that's really unfortunate. I don't like that kind of future. And I mean, and now the college degree is the new high school degree. So it's like everybody has to keep, where does it stop,
I mean, the thing that I see is the opportunity for us to shape that because we're in some respects at a stage where we can begin to plan and prepare if we choose to do so. Axel, it seems.
No, I think, look, we need to take our people on that journey. I mean, you ask who's responsible. I think training development is a really core task that also from an enterprise perspective we need to address. Not being blindsided. There will be job losses. There will be huge impact, but we need to make sure that we can get the people somewhat on the journey. And also, that's what I say all the time to our own people. Everybody is individually also somewhat responsible and responsible responsible for its own development. And then obviously you have a societal aspect. I mean, that is where, it's interesting to see also when you look to, the last industrial revolutions, what countries have adjusted quickly. They have been more a sophisticated training education system than those countries where you had millions of people left behind. So it's a kind of a multi-dimensional issue, but people development will be a key topic for the next...
Without putting yourself out of business, what's the secret sauce to rapid evolution, if you will, and adjusting quickly to ensure you survive? For banks, anyway.
I'm not sure if there's a secret. I'm not sure if there's a secret sauce. I think it's ultimately to have a culture of innovation and a culture of transformation. I think that's the secret sauce. You only can succeed in that quickly, rapidly changing environment when various elements and parts of the organization are embracing that. You cannot delegate that somewhat to a think tank or whatsoever. So I think those that can do that. And then the second secret sauce you need to have a clear strategy, a clear vision where you want to go and what you want to do for your customer base and where you want to have your distinct, differentiators. So these are the two things I would say: clear perspective, clear strategy where to go, but then you need to have the culture of innovation and of transformation. And that is not that obvious. After the financial crisis, we have been told it's a culture of compliance. Don't do any mistake. Don't do this trial and error. Just stick to the rules. And this is the complete mindset shift that we need to that needs to take place. On one hand, that culture of compliance that we all needed to nurture and implement in the organization, that will need to stay. But we need to find ways to innovate and embrace the change. I think for me that's the two things that go into the secret sauce.
Alex.
If there were a secret sauce, we would be cooking now, and
I know you are.
As opposed to, well, maybe yes. I was just talking about it, but I agree with what's been said. I say, what does it mean for me? It's that culture of innovation. It has to be very client-centric. It has to be focused on the human. Right? If I'm going to facilitate commerce, prosperity, and I have to do this in a very human way, and again, not in a vacuum, but with a focus on addressing real client needs. And I think there's another element which is having the courage to discard certain ways of doing things. Trying things. Obviously, learning is not failure. Learning is a success. So there's there's amount of encouraging this within our organizations, but importantly evolving the way we work. In day-to-day operations, but also in the way we engineer, in the way we innovate, in the way doing it in probably a faster and more effective way than we have historically.
Amber, did you want to weigh in? Is there a question from the audience or two? Is anyone bold enough to raise your hand?
Only if your name begins with A. Adam, right?
That's right.
Well, actually, it's Francisco, so F, but close enough. And I'm a millennial, and I'm probably one of the few millennials in this room. And we're talking about innovation, right, and a culture of innovation, and a couple of observations, right? So on this stage, you've got three men in suits, and you've got a woman who represents innovation, not in a suit, right?
This is totally a suit.
What's wrong with our suit?
What's your point?
A different type of
It's a
suit.
cyberpunk suit.
It's a cyberpunk suit.
There we go.
There you go. And I think about my generation, right? And for example, when the bankers came to school to recruit us, this was 2007. There were 10 schools that they would recruit from, right, in the U.S. But the students from those 10 schools no longer want to work for the banks, right? For my generation, quote unquote, they wanted to work for Google, and now they want to do their own thing, and they want to compete against you, right? And so now when UBS come to campus in the US, now there's 30 schools you have to go to, right? Because that talent pool that you used to rely on is no longer interested, right, in that same sense. So I'm wondering, right, if we're talking about harnessing innovation, well, how are you going to connect with me, right, the millennial? Because I'm driven by values. I'm driven by the mission statement. And I think to myself, well, gosh, do I want to, harness my innovation to make a publicly traded bank more money, or do I want to compete against that bank, right? What's the impact that I want to leave? And I'm not making a value statement, right? I'm just wondering what your reaction would be to that perspective, because I think that perspective is a common one, right, for the millennials.
No, and I think it's a real challenge. You know, people look for, and they're glad that you say, you know, I think for me, to be a millennium is a question of attitude, not a question if you have a suit or not. It's also not a question of age for me. And you framed it very well up. It's a question of value. People are increasingly looking. I see this also with my daughters. It's really, you know, what is the societal value? What is the greater good? What is the purpose? And that's where we, I think, have a real gap to close. Still, I think we did some good progress. And then look, it's also about competition. Maybe you know, the great years where, you know, the best and the brightest just wanted to go into banking or investment banking, they are partially over. They try to go to somewhere else, and I see that as a challenge that we need to address. I think the industry as such has a lot to offer in terms of, you know, for people with intellectual curiosity, people who want to drive change, and people that want to be somewhat in the intersection between, call it the real economy, the real world, and the financial economy, and the actual value creation, also from a societal perspective, is huge, but maybe not that tangible. And that is certainly something, you know, when we want to reach out to people like you, we need to get better.
Yeah. I'll give you a personal perspective on this, which is I have a few kids, and they've all said I'm not doing the same thing you are. I'm so not doing the same thing you are. But then when I ask, you know, what do you mean? I'm not wearing a tie at work. Right. So at which point the conversation evolves to well, you know, you don't have the monopoly of values, and perhaps, you know, I can have values with a tie as well. But importantly, I think the point is if we leave behind organizations that our kids don't want to join, then we will have done something seriously wrong. And you know, I think we're in the process of evolving, in the same time as our kids are in the process of growing up a little bit. You know, at least I hope so.
Yeah.
And we're getting to the point where we're going to have banks that people are really thrilled to join and really excited in joining, and perhaps that involves a different dress code. I don't know, but you know.
Perhaps.
Amber, go ahead, and we'll take one more question from the audience.
As the other millennial in the room, I graduated in 2008 with a degree in anthropology. I did technology for fun. I didn't think I could get paid to do technology because I was around a bunch of people that didn't like tech. I was a nerd, so I got made fun of. So my mom's best friend said, she was a math professor, she's like, you need to learn about people and ethics and all these things, otherwise you'll just work for a missile company. Not that that's bad, but you should know why you're doing it when you go in. And so I got this degree in anthropology, and I said, you know, however much tech we put on something, it doesn't really mean anything unless it's done well. And so sometimes it's, you know, we have to ask the questions like, what are we optimizing for? Yeah. Is this actually quality, or is it assumed quality? For a long time, we assumed if you wore a business suit and a tie, that would be assumed quality. And I had my Brooks Brothers outfit that I wore every day when I was, you know, the CEO. It didn't have a tie, but it was very formal because I was working with people that had an assumption that this certain uniform was associated with this power. And now we all kind of see through that, right? When I realized that a lot of business deals are done over drinks versus like in a conference room, and that board meetings were something that, you know, you figured things out and then you had the meeting. Like there was just all of this untold stuff that I found out. But because I graduated in 2008, I was pretty much doomed financially. Like I had college debt and I had to come up with something. And I think what a lot of millennials are seeing is like, well, I saw that my parents worked for this bank, and then they got laid off or fired, and they didn't know how to deal with anything. This is awful. Like, I don't want to be like this because I don't know how far the future is going to be for me. And so either you make something, and honestly, if you make a startup on the side that has really great user experience, you'll probably get bought by one of these large banks. And the worst thing that a large bank can do is say, here's this thing with amazing user experience that we could have never built ourselves, because we're too constrained on what looks like a functioning company in some cases, and often is functioning. And then we're just going to smother it. Like case in point, Bank Simple it still is, really great user interface. And so the bank that bought it, actually kind of merged the two pretty well, because that company was all about good user experience and good customer service. So there's still this great opportunity, but it's really hard to do innovation within larger companies. I mean, you have these innovative departments that look like they're being innovative, but the minute you try to put that product and merge it into the larger company, it's really hard to do. And oftentimes, the best thing to do is, after you graduate, if you think you know a better way to do a thing, go off and do the thing. You're going to run into all the regulation and the difficult stuff that the banking industry has for a reason, but you might end up making something that's really beautiful to use that is more from a customer perspective than any bank would understand because they're too abstracted away from it. So I think it is the right direction a lot of times.
Yeah, I know I'll add 2 points, and I know we're running short on time. One is I work for a lot of the companies that you mentioned, and one of the things I observe is that there is no monopoly on socially responsible companies, and so they exist in the financial services sector as well as in the tech sector. Second, I think companies like Google and Microsoft and Sibos, benefit from expanding the pool of people that they're recruiting from. And so the idea that these companies were great because they would only recruit from 10 schools has been proven to be a fallacy. And by expanding the pool at which they're recruiting, they're actually doing better. And so I think there's actually a benefit that has come from that expansion. So we're out of time. If there is one final thought that I wasn't smart enough to ask that you want to convey, why don't we just go down the line very quickly and then we'll end. Sure.
We for a long time had a kind of more one-size-fits-all culture, and we don't have that anymore. And so I guess we have to hire people representative of all these different walks of life, because otherwise we're not going to be able to understand how to serve them well. And finally, we have to ask, what are we actually optimizing for? Because if we're optimizing for the wrong thing, no matter how much firepower we throw at it, it'll end up being the wrong thing.
Great. Alex?
A ideological point, which is prosperity is a good thing. Commerce and prosperity are good things for the world. We need banks to facilitate trade, commerce, prosperity, and in fact do a better job of it. And that's really what we're discussing here.
Axel?
No, we might not see the impact of blockchain, artificial intelligence, robotics, and machine learning as of today. We will see it in 4 to 8 years.
Great. Thank you all. You did it. You were truly A+. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.